All right. Thank y'all so much. So we are gonna get ready to get started. You can't see who's talking. So hello, I'm Alexis Sims. I'm the Resource Center for the Family Resource Center with Henrico Schools Family and Community Engagement Department. So this session is put on and this series, excuse me, is put on for our Mental Health Awareness with Amy Johnson, who is a trauma specialist with Henrico, excuse me, not Henrico, I'm in mental health. I looked at the table with Henrico Schools and our student support and wellness team. So would you like to introduce our guest speaker for the day? And I'm going to scoot on to the side.
Good evening, and thank you. I'm like, what? Where am I supposed to? So sorry. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you all for joining us and being here with us. We are excited. The student support and wellness team is really excited to partner with so many different mental health students. Excited to announce Allyson was also for grief. Again, it's partnership.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Got right in. Okay. I'm Allyson Drake. As Amy said, I work at a place called Full Circle Grief Center. We're located in Henrico County. We're right at the corner of Plum and Patterson. And actually, I think I have a slide about it. Oops. That way. Okay. We are a nonprofit organization. We've been around for 15 years. We offer 3 different types of services. We offer group sessions that are free of charge for anybody that's interested. We have family groups. We have a perinatal loss group, a suicide loss group, an overdose loss group. We partner with Virginia Victim Assistance Network to offer a homicide loss group, and we have general grief groups as well. And then we offer individual counseling services as well. So those are offered for children starting at ages 3 all the way up to adults. And those we take insurance, and we also have a reduced self-pay rate as well for those. And then we do educational programs just like this throughout the community. So that's our website, and I have my cards back there if anybody wants. The quote I love to start with, if you're looking at grief and you're looking to support children or other people in your life with grief, unfortunately, it's one of those things that we can't fix. We can't go to a group. We can't go to counseling. We can't, as a parent, fix this for them. So what we're looking for is trying to help kids, help teenagers integrate that loss and try to figure out how to now live their life after they've had significant loss, significant death in their life. So I love this quote. It's healing from grief is not the process of forgetting. It's the process of remembering with less pain and more joy. So we do a lot of, talking about their loved one who died, talking about memories, documenting memories, talking about the not so great parts of relationships that we have with people who have died. And that's a lot of what we do in grief counseling and grief work. Just some statistics for you. These are probably about 3 years old, I believe. So it's about 1 in 5 children will experience a death of somebody very close to them, somebody in their direct everyday life by the time they turn 18. I recently saw some numbers that indicated that we're a little closer to 1 in 4. Somebody that's in their everyday life. 78% of 11 to 16-year-olds have lost at least one of their friends, one of their classmates. And then we'll talk a little bit more about, what we see as teachers, what we see as professionals, what we see as parents for children who experience a significant loss. So these statistics, I think, are truly important when you're looking at why. Why do we need to support kids who are going through grief? We need to support adults as well, but I'm focusing tonight a little bit more on kids and grief and families and grief. But these are kids that are supported in their grief. And what that means is whether it's from an agency like Full Circle, whether it's from a counselor, whether it's from a spiritual advisor, whether it's from a teacher that really takes, time to spend time with them and talk to them, a coach, a grandparent, another parent, whatever it is, but kids that find that support. So it doesn't always have to be professional support. It's just somebody that will walk with a child, walk with a teenager through their grief. They're 9 times less likely to drop out of high school. They're 10 times less likely to get involved in substance abuse, 5 times less likely to complete suicide, and 20 times less likely to develop behavioral disorders. So again, why it's important in whatever way that support may come for a child, but it's important that we allow kids that time and that space to process what they're going through. So quote unquote normal grief. I heard somebody doing a presentation one time that said everybody's grief is as different as their fingerprint. So you may have a family unit or a classroom that is processing the same death. And everybody in the family unit might be doing it completely differently. So, you have 3 children and they all may be processing this death completely different, even though that loss was exactly the same person and the same experience. So this is kind of, so I will say normal grief. There's so many things that influence how we grieve, our spiritual backgrounds, our trauma history, and whether it's your first loss or not your first loss, your support system. There's so many things that influence it. So it's really hard to say this is exactly what grief looks like. We'll have people that'll call our center and say, my child is exhibiting these behaviors. Do you think they're grieving? Well, I don't know. I don't know your child, but I can tell you what many children show when they're grieving as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about these, but anybody stop me anytime to ask any questions. I tend to talk really quickly, so I apologize for that. So I wanted to just bring about and show that there's so many different manifestations of grief. Many of us, when we think of grief, we think of sadness. We think of the tears. Anybody that's walked the walk of grief know that it's completely so much more than that. It affects us emotionally. It affects us physically. It affects us behaviorally. It affects us cognitively. It affects us physically. And this is not even remotely an exhaustive list. I bet many of you that have gone through grief can add different things to this list. But I think that the things that surprise people a lot, what I hear a lot that is surprising about grief is really that mental piece of it too. The lack of concentration, that inability to sleep, that sort of detachment feeling like the world is going still and I'm here mourning and grieving my person who died. Kids, adults, same, my brain just doesn't work the way that it used to work. And a lot of those things, the yearning, the missing, what I hear a lot from people that's really, and again, is a huge generalization, but that's really hard is that guilt, that regret that people often, those woulda, shoulda, couldas that you're feeling as a result of grief. And even if your cognitive brain knows that, that there's really a lot of nothing you could have done, many times our heart, our, spirit is telling us something different. And then, based on people's individual different spiritual beliefs, some people fall really deep into their faith when they're experiencing grief. Others start questioning their faith. Others become angry and try, seeking a lot more of like spiritual guidance and things like that. But and the physical piece obviously can be, many people have described it when you're in that early stages of grief that it feels like a lot of times you have the flu, like it just feels awful in your body. And so just understanding that, for us as adults as well as for children. Huge. Yes.
Well, does that vary as well a person goes through?
Totally vary. And so when I say the early stages of grief, notice I didn't define that. Because for some people, those deep in the trenches days of grief last days, they last a week or two. Other people, it lasts months of just, it depends on what type of loss it was. Was it sudden? Was it expected? Was it a traumatic death? Was it a loss of a child? Were you the caregiver and you were taking, there's just so many different things that go along with it, but so it can really vary. I have people in my groups that adults that have experienced a death 2 weeks ago, and I have people that in my groups that experienced the death 20 years ago, and they've never ever processed it, and they feel like that it's coming back you know, or they never took that time to work through it. They never gave themselves the space to work through it. So it really varies a lot.
So would you recommend that someone possibly start counseling?
It's a really good question. I always feel like that when somebody feels that they are ready to do it, then we need to find what resource feels the best thing for them. So sometimes, if somebody comes to us and they've experienced a really traumatic sudden death, and they were there, or they were there after it happened, or something like that. So maybe that's not time for a group. Maybe I try to get them connected to individual resources so they can kind of work through some of the traumatic grief and then feel like that it's an individual group. No, we take the approach at full circle, and when somebody reaches out to us and says they're ready, wherever that time is, that we just make sure that we're putting them in the resources and services that feel best to them, that are best for them. So, that's a really good one. I love this because we love to think about grief as this linear process. So I do this, let's check it. I'm angry, now I'm checking it off. I'm, you know, in denial, let's check it, but that's just not how it works at all. Grief is not linear. There's no workbook for it. There's no like textbook that this is how this is going to go. So I really think that it's a lot more like the picture on the right, if you're looking at it, that it's just, it's messy. And I know many of you have probably heard of Kubler-Ross, who did the stages of grief. And she actually meant that to be stages for somebody that had a terminal illness and they were going through grieving processes themselves for their own life. And so I'll give you another option. I think it's my next slide. So I really love, and again, it's such a personal preference, but there's a lot of theories, a lot of things that talk about what we do and how we move through our grieving process. This is one of my favorites. It's called the tasks of grief. I don't like tasks because it feels like, again, you check it off, but I try to ignore that part of it. But it talks about the 4 different things that we do in our grief. One of them is accepting the reality of the loss. I could say a lot of things about that, but it's just sometimes it takes a while for our brain to be able to understand and accept what happened. It's that, you know, when you hear people say, I picked up the phone to call them, or expect them to walk through the door, or I have a lot of kids tell me, I hate that moment when I wake up in the morning and it takes like 30 seconds to realize that my loved one is not here anymore. You know, that and it happens to us as adults too. So it's that time that it takes for you cognitively, emotionally, to physically to accept the reality of the loss. And for some people that's quick, some people it takes a week. The next one is experiencing the pain of grief. Everything I've read in research, everything that I've read, you know, from bereavement experts, but mostly people that I talk to and I work with that are in my groups or clients that I work with, many people try really hard to walk around it, to just not go through that pain of grief. But you really can't get to a point where you're integrating it, where you're accepting your new normal, you're doing all those things that we try to do in our grief until you just walk right through that pain. And it's not an enjoyable process. But you know, we'll talk a little bit in a minute about like just different coping skills and different ways to work through that grief. But and I think that's really important with children, especially, is giving them that space, encouraging them to do things that help them do that. For a lot of kids, it's not sitting and talking. It's not, let me sit in front of you and say, how are you feeling? And they're going to like vomit up information. Like, it's great when they do, but a lot of times they don't. So let's figure out how to get you to work through this. Is it running? Is it creative expression? Is it journaling? Is it, you know, just so many different ideas to help kids just work through that pain and work through that grief. And the next one is adjusting to the environment with a deceased missing. So now what? What does my new normal look like? What does our household look like? What is everybody's roles? What does our friend group look like? That our friend is no longer here. It's figuring out what that new normal looks like. And again, for different people, these stages take different amounts of time. And for one person, accepting the reality may be the longest. For someone else, adjusting the environment may be the longest. It's just so individual and so personal. But it's and so much of the research says that one of the biggest parts of healing or working through your grief is staying connected in some way to that person who has died. So how do we keep that connection? How do we, move forward? We never say move on, move forward in my life, but how do I keep this person and their memory and my connection to them as kids? If we're working with kids, how can we help kids honor and remember their loved one and stay connected? It can be through pictures. It can be through storytelling. It can be, if this is the loved one's birthday, let's talk about what their favorite meal was. What do you want to make for their dinner? What do you want to make for dinner? Just ways that you can keep children and teenagers feeling connected to their loved one. And a lot of people get scared about that. Like, I don't want to make them feel more sad, or I'm not comfortable with that. But there's so much research that talks about that we fare better in our grief when we find ways to stay connected. So how does grief impact children? Again, not an all exhaustive list, but some kids, probably the number one thing I hear from children and adults is the sleep problems. Either not being able to fall asleep, not being able to stay asleep, having bad dreams, being afraid to go to sleep, or wanting to sleep all the time. Not having energy. Grief is emotionally and physically exhausting. And so, for some of us that you're grieving and then you can't sleep, miserable. It is miserable. And so, being aware of that with kids, learning problems, not being able to concentrate, all those cognitive things that we saw, not being able to concentrate, not being able to remember to do their work. But there are some kids that go the other way. There's some kids that become hyper focused on school, or hyper focused on sports, or playing their instrument, or volunteer work, or whatever it is, because they don't want to experience pain and grief. So they become super focused, or they say, I can't cause any trouble for my mom because my dad has died. So I got to stay on my work, and I've got to keep making sure my grades are good, and I've got to make sure that I don't cause her any problems. We got to watch out for those kids too. Those kids that become like, I have to be good. So I probably see the equal amount of kids that do this and push themselves and put so much pressure on themselves, and I do the kids that say, I'm done with school, I can't do it, or I don't care about schoolwork, or I'm not going to school, or whatever it may be. There's emotional behavior issues. Those vary so much amongst children. It could be those kids though that you've never seen acting out that are starting to act out. It's kids that are talking back to people that they've never talked back to before. Kids that are regressing in behavior. Small kids, you may see them sucking their thumb again. You may see them with their blankie again. You may see them wetting the bed again. It's just that regressive behavior that we can see in children. Or those emotional outbursts that they fall and they skin their knee, and you're like, you would never really cry about that before, but then it's a full-blown meltdown. So it's just, other different ways of getting their feelings out. Lower self-perception. So I really feel like that is a lot more with again, making a generalization, but teenagers. I see a lot with teenagers when they've had a mom, a dad, a caregiver, a sibling, a best friend, whoever it may be, die, that they don't want to be that kid that everybody knows is grieving. And they're worried about, and again, total generalization, just saying what kids have said to me. Obviously, not every kid is like this at all. But it's just that fear of like, what could I have done? I caused this. I messed this up. But I also don't want people who are being weird around me, who aren't talking to me exactly how they normally do. Some people are avoiding me. Some people keep saying, how are you? It's like trying to maneuver that a little bit. It's hard when you return back to school. And then obviously, for many kids and teenagers, it's that fear of losing somebody or fear of getting sick themselves. Because the worst had happened that they thought that couldn't happen. Now, of course, what else can happen? It's like we live in this world that, before a significant loss, that you feel safer, you feel more secure, you feel more, you don't worry about those things. Well, now the worst happens. So, I don't know, I don't love that I used the word resilient children here, but I couldn't find the word to think of it. It's just more of like the children that handle grief and loss in a little bit better way. Nobody handles it perfectly, but those kids that have that support system, those kids that have family or a friend support group, or they have a church or spiritual community, or just those kids that have that support system and people, you know, around to be there for them. Those kids that have already had that high self-esteem, they have that sense of self. They have, you know, I know who I am. I know what my beliefs are. That's hard, especially when you're a teenager or you're 8. Hard to have that sense of self. And especially when now you've gone through grief, you've gone through loss, just to find who you are and your sense of self. Those kids that have had fewer daily changes. Many changes as a result of grief are inevitable. Can't help it. But those kids that have the fewer amount of changes are kids that often fare better. So, you know, that are maybe able to stay in their home, or they're maybe able to stay at the same school because of their loss. They're able to stay in the same activities that they were in. Kids that have structure and consistency and routine that they had before. That is so hard when you as a parent or caregiver are grieving yourself. So hard to do that. When you're trying to just get through your day and then, okay, I've got to make sure they get here and I got to make sure they've done their homework and I've got to make sure that's really hard. So we just do the best we can. We do the best we can. So yeah, those kids that have consistent discipline, those kids are allowed to stay connected to their loved one. They talk about them. They're able to, you know, ask questions, tell stories. That the parent and caregiver, and I say functioning well. And what I mean by that is, I need to change that word. It's more of modeling grief for them. It's those parents that aren't like, let's push this under the table and under the rug, whatever the saying is, and we're not going to talk about it. It's the parents, the caregivers, the family members, and the teachers and the adults in their lives that are modeling grief behavior. Yeah, I'm sad. I'm really sad. I need a minute because I'm feeling really sad today. Letting them see you cry. And I'm not saying like make them be the one who has to pick you up off the floor and, you know, that kind of stuff, but that you're going to cry and you're going to be angry. Today, I'm just really mad because I miss them so much. So it's modeling that behavior for them to say to them, your feelings and your thoughts and your behaviors are okay. And I have them too. And so that they can hopefully give you a little bit of grace while you're trying to give them a little bit of grace back. And so it's those parents that can model that behavior, those caregivers that can say, this is hard for all of us. What do you need from me? This is what I need from you too. Oh, yes.
How can you not help?
How can you?
Like, let's say, I'm emotionally almost every week, and then I have a little one who's child not show it. I child like step away when he wants to be here. How do you like go like that?
So they want to be with you
Everyone,
all the time. Or do you think they're worried that something's going to happen to you, or they need you for support, or is it?
I think he's worried because not only is one person, he almost just lost me. So I help him. And I can verify myself.
That's a really good question. And I wish I had like this perfect answer for you. I think as much as you, because it's hard, you said 5, that's hard. You know, if you had even an 8, 10-year-old, you know, whatever, that you could just really explain it a little bit more too. I think, you know, being able to say, because that's another thing. We can't promise kids that we're not going anywhere. You know what I mean? We can't say, I'm here and I promise I'm good. So we can't do that. So being able to say, you know what? I'm good. I'm okay. I'm feeling really sad today. But you know, I'm safe. I'm healthy. I'm whatever you're doing. I'm wearing my seatbelt. I'm going to the doctor. I'm, you know, whatever it is that you do to protect yourself and keep yourself safe. I do all of these things. I'm not sick right now. I'm not whatever. I'm just feeling really sad. So it's like that reinforcement of I'm okay. I'm just feeling really sad. I'm not sick. I'm not, well, yeah, whatever they need to hear. And I just, mom, they call you mom, or whatever they call you, like, I just, can I just have like 5 minutes? How about you watch a show for 5 minutes and I just need 5 minutes to sit and take some deep breaths. Tell the child what you're doing. I just need a minute to sit here and take some deep breaths because I'm feeling just really sad. And like, so it's, what would you like to do in those 5 minutes? Do you want to color? Do you want to watch TV? Do you want to have snack? Do you want to hold the whatever iPad, whatever it is, and just being able to say, you pick what you want to do because I just need 5 minutes. You don't really feel that, just need to take some. So it's that coping skill that you're telling them that you're doing, or I need 5 minutes to put my feet in the grass and look up at the sunshine. Whatever it is, I need 5 minutes to journal, and which is so hard when you're feeling so emotional is to do that. But even if you just want to scribble in a journal or whatever it is, like, so I think it's important to say, I'm okay. I'm gonna be okay. But right now, I feel really sad and I just need 5 minutes. What would you like to do for the next 5 minutes? My mom has a little bit of a break. I love you so much. I just need those 5 minutes so that we can play in a minute. So it's just making sure they understand where you are, but I need this for just a second so we can get back together. That is one of the hardest things that you do when you're grieving, is to find the time for yourself, because you are taking care of, many of us parents, caregivers, we're taking care of other people too. And so it's trying to keep yourself together so you can take care of someone else, but yet you need that time so then you can actually go and take care of yourself. Because, and so I think explanations, short facts, I need this. What do you need right now? What can I give you? What can you do so I can get? But I'll be back. We can play, or we can have to go for a walk. That's hard when you have a child that age that doesn't understand.
I was gonna say a snack and a yoga mat went a long way in my house when we were kind of going through still going through it, but just navigating this process of we can't keep functioning like this. Of what is it? So we got, we got our mats. We went to Five Below together, picked out our mats, and it's just the 2-year-old got their snack and sat on their mat. The 5-year-old actually has some like understanding of yoga poses and things. And we're just gonna have our moment and we're gonna stay on our mat, but we have to be quiet so that I feel like I can gather my thoughts. She feels like she's doing something to support the activity. It's play, it's imagination, all the things that makes her feel like she's doing something and she's helping. And the 2-year-old has a snack. That's all he needs in life.
I think he's if he was that thing, he's that child, but he's also a child where it's hard. Like, I'm grieving, we grieve, but then you get the questions like he's that child, but then you get the, I have to go to the doctor. With that, are you coming back or are you going back where you were? It's like it's not a conversation you would have.
No,
but he's very rich,
and that's when you get in trouble, is when a child is older. Their brain functioning is older than, because they're still 5, but they know more things, and so it's like then the worries come a little bit more, but I think that it's as short and succinct, but as honest as you can be. We're going to get this checked out, and mom plans to be back at this time. I think that's what you can do. And I love the idea of having like, this is my space, my mat that I'm going to breathe on. This is yours. Maybe y'all before can do something like make homemade Play-Doh, or, something that you're building your coping skill box for both of you. So get a yoga mat, do some homemade Play-Doh, get a stress ball, get some bubbles, things like that, okay, this is how we can relax. We can take deep breaths with bubbles, and then, but we need to be quiet. We'll set the timer for 5 minutes. We both just need But I love that, like, everybody has their spot. It's hard being a parent who's grieving when you're, trying to take care of others in your house, both children and adults. I won't go over all this. I just want to put this in here for, and if anybody wants a copy of this, my card is over on the student support wellness table. I'm happy to send you a copy if you just want to email me and ask me for copies. But it's just, what impact does grief have on individuals and in children? I won't go through all these. I'm happy to answer any questions, but the nature of the relationship is really in terms of how a child processes it. Were they really close to this person? Was it a combative relationship, but yet they still loved them and cared for them? Was this, the person that they always talked to? Was this the parent that, took them to baseball every time? Whatever it may be, and that all that stuff really does impact the grief process. Whether the child was present when the death happened, sort of things. So I said before, no two children grieve alike, no two people grieve alike. And they grieve in children, especially younger kids, they grieve in doses and spurts. So it's like their emotional brain can't handle it for so long. And so it's like you may see this high emotional time where they're on your lap, they're crying, or they're, they've crawled in your bed and they're talking to you, and then boom, I'm going to go play, and I'm okay, and I'm laughing, and I'm like, wanting to invite friends over. And you're like, hold on, how are we wanting friends over? We were just in this highly emotional situation, and now you bring people to my house, so it's like just like this. Or they're watching, y'all are watching a movie together, you're laughing, you're having, a good movie night, and then all of a sudden the tears come over something, and the tears come out, and then boom, we're back watching. So I think that that's one of the things that's really hard about walking with a child who's grieving, that it's a lot of this. And so we just kind of have to follow and take their lead on that. I talked about some of these before, a couple of things. As I said, I think I touched on this too. Children may sacrifice their own needs, especially if you have a wise soul of a child, like you were talking about. A lot of times kids will say, I don't want to cause a problem, or I know mom or dad is sad, or I know grandma is sad, so I'm going to walk the straightest line that I can and make sure that I don't cause any problems. They may say, well, I don't want to talk to mom about grandma because I don't want to make her sad. And so that's part of why modeling behavior is important, because if they're okay with seeing tears, they're okay with hearing you say, I'm really angry, then they're okay coming to you with their feelings as well. So, but it's sacrificing their own needs. I had to add in the hormones and the mood swings for our teenagers may intensify those grief reactions. It's just those emotional turns, what is the word? Ups and downs may be obviously exacerbated because of grief. So I want to make sure I say children are really quick to blame themselves. I've heard this more times than I can tell you. I could probably stand up here and tell you 50 stories of children that I've worked with that blame themselves for their loved ones' death. We know as adults that they had absolutely nothing to do with it. They had no power like that. They had no causal relationship in any way, shape, or form to their loved one's death. But children, as we know, many of them are very self-focused, and so, or don't understand, and so they make up things in their head. And they say, well, if I hadn't said to my sister, I hate you, then they may not have died. If I had told my mom, if I had noticed that my mom was so tired before the doctors did, then maybe I could have saved her. And so it's like they take on often a lot of things. I had a child that I worked with a while ago, who they were playing sports in a rec league with their parent. They had gotten in a fight on the way to this sporting event. they go out and they're playing the sporting event together, parent-child, and their parent goes into cardiac arrest and dies right in front. So I was working with this child probably a year and a half, 2 years after the death. And this child had carried around for almost 2 years that they thought that they caused their parents' death because somebody had murmured sometime that stress and arguing or emotional things can cause somebody's hurt. So they thought that short car ride with that little bit of a fight had caused their parents' death. So luckily I was able to keep my mouth shut, and the whole other room of 13, 14-year-olds said, "What are you talking about?" And, you know, sort of talked this child into the fact that, no, that wouldn't have caused a heart attack. But then I was able to talk to their other parent, and they were able to talk to the doctor, and we're able to talk about all the reasons that people have heart attacks that have nothing to do with an argument to a recreational sporting event. So those are the things that for us, we may be like, no way. They don't think that, but many times they do. They've come up with that. So just making sure we're being age appropriate and honest about causes, or honest about their lack of involvement. So teenagers, I had to put this up here about teenagers in terms of how different teenagers are in terms of the way they choose how to process their grief. You know, some kids may choose music, creative expression, talking, want to go to counseling, want to be parts of groups. Other kids may want to build things, run, exercise, go boxing, go biking, punch things, not people, but just things, or, you know, so it's all of that is good. It's just finding a way for a child to get their grief out. And presenting them with a variety of different options and ways that they can work through the grief. And you know what works for you on Monday may not work for you on Wednesday. You know, and letting them know that so they have a toolbox of it. So what are we trying to do in terms of working with kids in grief? This is kind of what we've been talking about, but just understanding the loss, accepting the loss, grieving, the actual mourning process of grieving, commemorating and honoring, finding ways to stay connected. And then somewhere down the road, and I could do a whole presentation on this for children and adults, we can talk about post-traumatic. But there's a time in grief where you're ready to talk about post-traumatic growth. It's not this time, but it's just finding those things that have happened because of your loss. That how has that changed you? It's not like post-traumatic growth, like I have to go find start a foundation that raises money for X, Y, and Z. It doesn't have to be big. It's just, how has this changed me? You know, for some people it is, I'm going to make sure I never leave a loved one without telling them that I love them or how I feel, or whatever it would be. It's just, it can be small and personal, but it's just, there's a time and a place to talk about post-traumatic growth and grief. So what do we need? What do kids need? Hopefully I've talked about most of these, but I always encourage families to involve children and teenagers as much as possible in rituals or things that can help them stay connected to their loved ones. You know, it's the loved one's birthday. Do we not want to do anything, or do we want to buy cupcakes to honor them? Or do we, Thanksgiving or a holiday? What does everybody feel like? Do we want to put a candle in the middle of the table, or do we just want to have our own private time when we think about this person? Do we want to put their picture on the table? Whatever it may be, but just trying as much as we can to involve kids with decisions that are age appropriate. Not decisions that are not age appropriate, but in rituals and things like that. Someone that will just listen to them. And I've learned so much from the kids that I work with. And I try to take those things into my role as a parent as well. Because both my kids have been through a significant grief experience as well recently. And I try really hard to listen to the kids. And what I hear mostly from teenagers a lot is, even from older kids, is I just want an adult that won't tell me how I'm supposed to feel or what I'm supposed to do with my grief. So it's just asking the questions, how are you feeling? What can I do? What's working for you? What's frustrating you most? Like being able to ask those questions to them and not saying, oh, I get it. Trust me. Let me tell you how it worked, what worked for me, or let me tell you what you should do. You know, those parents, they want those people, that adults in their lives that will just listen and ask them questions. Yeah, I got this. So I think the biggest thing for us as adults is understanding number two. I mean, obviously, number one is important, listening, but number two is we can't fix it. Like I said, that's how we started, is we can't fix it. So, and I know a lot of us as adults, myself included, is that sometimes we try to fill that silence. Well, let me I'll tell you what to do. I'll tell you, how this should be. And just being able to be there and listen and not judge them for their feelings, and helping them understand you can't fix this, but you'll be there. You'll be there for them. Talk about the person, tell stories about the person, mention the person who died by name. I've heard from a lot of grieving parents that they're so scared that people are going to forget their child. So making sure that people around them are saying their name, telling their stories, honoring them to their loved ones. The third one, and I put this up here because the way I look at it is those platitudes or those cliches and things like that, it's not, they're not for us to tell someone who's grieving. If someone who's grieving wants to say and believes, oh, they're in a better place, and I feel really lucky about that, then you take their guidance. It's not for us, I don't think, and what I hear a lot from other people is to say, well, at least, those things, at least they're not suffering anymore, at least they're in a better place. Well, a lot of kids and a lot of adults that would rather say, no, I want them with me, not there, or wherever we believe they are. And so I always say to people, watch the platitudes, watch the cliches, and take the lead from the person who's grieving. If they say, I'm comforted that they're in a better place, or they're not in pain anymore, those things, then that's okay to use those conversational things with them. And the reason I say these things is because go back to everyone grieves differently. So it's not for us to assume what's going to make that person feel better. And especially when you're in deep grief, you don't really actually many times know what's going to make you feel better. And so it's just taking that lead of the person who's grieving and just doing our best. I think a lot of these are things we've talked about too. I heard this in a training I went to. It says if it's unmentionable, it's unmanageable. So for kids, if we don't have people around them that are willing to talk about their grief with them, then for kids that also often becomes, and for us as adults as well, it becomes unmanageable because we don't have that safe place. I've been doing this for 20 years. We're doing grief work, and I have kids that I work with. I work with mostly kids that will ask me questions, and I'm like questions about grief or death or loss. Like, I'm not sure how I should communicate my answer to them yet. I need to think about it. So I say to kids all the time, you know what? I don't know that. I need a few minutes to think about it. Just to give me a second to think about it and how I want to respond. And so knowing that that's okay, or if your child or a relative or somebody says something to you and you have this intense emotional reaction to it and you need a second, then I'll say, you know what? Let me think about that for a second. Getting yourself prepared for those questions, because children will ask a lot of questions that are hard to answer. So sometimes we need a minute, and that's okay. My summary that we've talked about. I think, yeah, questions. Anybody have any questions?